I understand what my guy is saying, but I really wish people would take the totality of colonization and slavery into mind before when they think about it, when they make statements about it, when they come to conclusions about it. Sir, you are absolutely right. The Spanish were taking indigenous slaves to the Americas, from the Americas, and taking them to Europe and Africa to sell them as slaves. It wasn't just from Africa. You're absolutely correct. But I need you to understand this on a worldwide scale. The Dutch West Indian Company, the Dutch Tea Company, the British Tea Company, all of them, they went to India and they took people from India and took them to Africa and made them slaves. They took people from Indonesia and took them to Africa and made them slaves. They took them to Europe and made them slaves. They took Africans to the Americans and made them slaves. They took the people from the Americas to Europe and other places and made them slaves. You see, in this slave trade, the best slave is one that's completely detached from their homeland and their families. So the slave trade is a much bigger picture. And yes, there were Indians who sold Indians. There were Africans who sold Africans. There were Europeans who sold Europeans. There was Americans who sold Americans, Indigenous Americans who sold Indigenous Americans. People did that because another person commented that I don't talk about the fact that Africans sold Africans. Everybody sold everybody. But it is the brutality of the European slavery that sticks out the biggest and makes the difference between everything else that was happening. You see, when Africans sold to slaves to other Africans, they didn't brutalize them and take their families and their cultures and strip them of who they are and their name and uh, dehumanitize them. Ah. When Indians did the same thing, whether it was North Indians selling South Indians, they were still slaves, but they didn't strip them of everything that they of their being. That is the major difference between European slavery and everybody else. Although the trans-Saharan slavery was also barbaric, it was nowhere near the barbarism of European slavery. And then here's the other thing about it. When you grow up in a country, you learn about that country's history and the impact of other world powers on that country. So, as an American child, they're not going to teach us about the slave trade that was happening in India, based on the British, some tea company, the British tea company. I don't know why the name escapes me right now, but they're not going to teach us about that because how impactful was that to America? How impactful was what happened with the Africans who sold African slaves in Africa, and then to what we were learning. They told us that initially Africans sold Africans to the Europeans that were brought to North America, but they didn't tell us anything about the ones going to South America. That was like a footnote. Even the Africans selling them was a footnote. They told us nothing about Africans selling slaves of Africans to other Africans because that had no impact in America. American history is teaching about America and whatever impacted America. So we learned a very little about Cortez, but we didn't learn the fullness of Cortez. We learned a little bit about the other conquistadors, but just a little bit. And the reason why Cortez became so important because of all the history we have to know in concerning America and what becomes Mexico. We knew very little about the Caribbean. And if you go to any other country, you're going to learn more about their history and things that impacted them. So why would I talk so much about other places that don't impact what America and what's going on in America to this day? Because some countries have done a better job and some countries have done a worse job of getting over the stain of slavery that occurred during the colonization time. But my main concern would be those in the country to which I grew up in. And then as we progress, others should progress. As others progress, we should progress. If I grew up in Brazil, I would be more concerned and more knowledgeable about the transatlantic slave trade and how it impacted Brazil. I was in the 10th or 11th grade before I found out that more slaves, the overwhelming majority, about 80% of slaves went to the Caribbean and South America than actually came to America. Because the way I was being taught, and most American kids, it seems like all the slaves came to the colonies. But later to find out that they did not, that even Haiti had more slaves went to Haiti than came to the Americas. That's amazing history to find out later. But we didn't study Haitian history because we weren't Haitian. So you make a good point. The colonizer did mix everything up and they mixed everybody around. But it's not really a one-sided story, as each region tells their own story. And what we have to do is stand back and look at the entire picture of the world. It's a lot. You're not going to get that in schools because it'll be too much. School will never finish their education. But as we become adults, we can stand back and we can see the entire picture. I understand you're coming, and I'm not throwing shade at you. The other person's coming in, the one I should have put up here, because I'd be throwing some shade at that one. But because they use the old excuse about, well, black people, there was black Africans who sold the slaves and they still got slavery going on, as if that frees colonial America of the atrocities that they committed. Just because some of the slaves were sold by Africans doesn't free up the treatment of those Europeans to those Africans that they enslaved. But just because some of the indigenous people were sent to Europe doesn't mean that the slaves in America came from the indigenous. That's the worst plan. If you really want to conquer a people, you strip them of their lands, their family ties, their alliances. You strip away their opportunities to leave by taking them off that land. And understand how I'm saying it, that's good business. It is bad business to make all the slaves or the majority of the slaves indigenous to the land to which they were born in. That's bad business. That's bad business. That's bad politicking. So you take them from somewhere else so that they don't have any backup. That's good business. So sounds horrible, but that's the truth of it when you take the emotions out of it. So you have a great day. Appreciate what you said. Have a great day. Remember always, you got to free yourself to be yourself because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibration.